Happy Tuesday, basketball fans. This is your Trogcast. That's Jeff Zink and Jim Reaker, two really old guys talking NCAA men's basketball as we get into the exciting part of the season. The roll-up isn't going to be all that much because basically our focus today is going to be looking at our conferences as we head into the end, and we'll be talking a little bit about Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, and coaches on the hot seat in each conference as we talk about going on into the tournament, which we'll talk about more next week. So that on the page, lots of things to do, but first let's say hello to Jim. How you doing today?
Oh, doing great, Jeff. Kind of a calm weekend as far as college basketball. Weren't many big upsets like we're accustomed to the last few weeks, but I kind of get the feeling maybe it's the calm before the storm. Things are going to get interesting here last 2 weeks, and then, of course, March right around the corner when it really gets crazy.
Yeah, it is going to get crazy. Unfortunately, you had a fun trip up to Milwaukee where you got to see your son and his fiancée, but unfortunately it wasn't good for the Musketeers, which I'm sure you'll talk about when you get to your Big East section. Well, like we said, we're just going to go into each conference today and give a brief view. We're going to spend about 4 to 5 minutes on each, with Jim and I alternating between the conferences that we've covered throughout the year, talking about issues going on through the end of the regular season, and then, of course, talking about our Player of the Year candidates, Coach of the Year candidates or choices, and the coach on the hot seat in each spot. So, Jim, I'll let you start. You've always got plenty of insight to provide for us, and I believe you wanted to lead off with the Big Ten.
Yeah, the Big Ten, which a lot of people have said is down this year, but I think the Big Ten is probably going to get, I'm looking at probably 7 teams into the NCAA. Early season, I was picking Wisconsin. They're still right there. But I have to tell you, I've changed my mind a little bit after watching that Purdue team. I just think that they're trending up, and Wisconsin, I don't know if they're trending down. They did have a big win against Maryland just recently to maintain that tie with Purdue, but they just don't seem to have the same edge they had early on in the year. So I like Purdue, and I can tell you, being from Indiana, Purdue was not one of my favorite teams ever, being a big Notre Dame fan when I was a youngster. So, but I like the way they're playing. Maryland's still hanging in there, a game out, but again, they don't overly impress me. Yeah, they're a pretty good team. Of course, the big story, I think, in the Big Ten is going to be, and you're going to hear this all March if it all comes out like I think it will, is Northwestern. And we've talked about that, I think, since day one, that Chris Collins doing a great job there, the Duke grad who is going to probably put the Northwestern Wildcats into the NCAA for the first time ever.
Yeah, it's a special event for the people up in Evanston, no doubt about it. So it's looking at that. Who have you got there for your Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, coached on the hot seat?
Oh, for the Big Ten. Okay, I was a little confused. I thought we were going to do that nationally, but I'll adjust here on the fly. Well, for a Coach of the Year, and actually I was going to almost throw him out for National Coach of the Year, back to Chris Collins. He's done an excellent job. Again, a program that's never been to the NCAA, never been a factor in the Big Ten, and what he's done with them this year, he would be the Coach of the Year. Player of the Year, again, it would be my choice for National Player of the Year, although that would be a very, very long-winded discussion. We have a lot of great players, and I don't think we have one dominant one this year in the country. But I'd go with Biggie Swanigan from Purdue. He's just he's a monster. If you haven't seen him play, you got to get to see him play. 18 points a game, 13 rebounds, and he's had 22 double-doubles already. And he can shoot a little bit on the outside. He's just if I'm an NBA team, I might take him number one, although I know there's a lot of other players in that consideration. And coach on the hot seat, again, that actually goes back to my national coach on the hot seat. That'd be Tom Crean. I think the Hoosier faithful is getting a little restless in this season. And you remember where they were. They had a big win. Who did they beat? North Carolina, was it, that first night? Their season's just trended downward, and I just think the Hoosier faithful are kind of getting tired of him having lots of talent and not being able to, win the Big Ten or make a big run for another national championship.
Mm-hmm. I agree. You got lots of. Sorry, I threw you off there. I thought you understood it was be by the conference as you go through. So we'll give you a little time to. You want me to do two like conference? Give you some time to look through some things, or?
No, I'm good.
You're good. You're always good. You always got plenty of insight, as I said. All right, that's all good stuff. I'm going to start off with the SEC, which has got a big week coming up now. Especially for the Florida Gators. They're hosting South Carolina, and then they have to travel to Kentucky on Saturday. Both games this week. If they win both, they're going to take the league title. If they lose to Kentucky, they could still win it if something else happened. But big week for Mike White and the Gators. It's been a season like no other for them. There wasn't a whole lot of love for them in the preseason polls, but they've been able to pull some things out. So a thing that we thought for sure, I know I thought it would be Kentucky and just about nobody else there. We've got Florida and Kentucky fighting it out. At the end, they're both at 12-2, and then South Carolina also pulling it up there, but they're 2 games out, so they're pretty much fighting for second or third place. Looking at that league, I think there's only really 2 big candidates for the player of the year, and to me that's Malik Monk and Sindarius Thornwell. Monk, the high-flying freshman out of Kentucky, who's at 21 points per game, 2.4 rebounds, 2.3 assists. He's also hitting 48% from the field and 41% from three. Thornwell has a great line as well, 20.2 points per game, 7 rebounds, 2.4 assists, and he's hitting 42% from the three and 83% from the free throw. I'd lean toward Thornwell for a couple of reasons. One, Monk is not necessarily known for his defense, and I always like to go with the all-around player. And also, even though he's a freshman, he's kind of been the leader of that team. That team hasn't quite come together the way people thought. It's kind of hard to say of a team that's 22-5, but there's just been cracks and there's been issues. And, Coach Cal's got just a couple of chemistry things to get to. So I'm going to lean toward Thornwell, mainly because of what he faced earlier in the season, where he had to own up some mistakes. He got suspended, came back as a better teammate, and now he's got the Gamecocks in the mix for an SEC championship. They probably won't make it. They'll do it. And that's one reason I've got Frank Martin up high for the coach of the year. I mean, South Carolina got absolutely no love, not one vote in the preseason poll. And now they're in the top 30, but they've been a little weaker of late. Let's see how that goes. Coach Cal always gets consideration. Has his team there every year with a revolving door of talent and high-flying talent. Just got to find time to do it. And then, of course, Mike White at Florida deserves every consideration. 37th in the preseason poll. Now he's got him number 13, and if he can pull that upset at Rupp on Saturday, he would win the SEC title. So right now, it's a tough choice because I like what Frank Martin's done, but I'd have to give the coach of the year in the SEC to Mike White and the Gators. On the hot seat, there's 2 coaches that I think are going to be looking for work at the end of the year. One is Johnny Jones at LSU. I mean, he had Ben Simmons last year and couldn't even make the NCAA tournament. And this year he's 1-13 in what was basically thought of as a so-so league, and 9-17 overall. In 5 years he's only got 1 NCAA berth, and that's not going to cut it down in Baton Rouge. And the other is Kim Anderson at Missouri. In 3 years he's only got 8 league wins and a 29% winning percentage, even though that's his alma mater, and he took over with some problems from Mike Hayes when he was there. That's just not going to cut it in either Tiger. And the reason I started with the SEC is that I've got to mention this. We didn't mention it, but the moment of the year has to be Canyon Barry shooting free throws like his father, Rick, down there in Florida. Not worried about the granny shots or the Richie Cunningham. He's shooting well over 88% shooting underhand, and it's a thing that I wish more people would consider and do. So that's it for the SEC. any thoughts or comments on you before we hear what you've got for the Big 12?
Yeah, two real quick. When I did do my hottest seats, I did my top 5, and I have to agree with you wholeheartedly on Johnny Jones and Kim Anderson. And, in fact, Kim Anderson may be even hotter than Johnny Jones. They say that program is just headed nowhere fast. And but, yeah, both of them are probably on the outs after this year. And then with the Rick Barry's son, actually his goal, I remember, I think it was during the Kentucky game they talked to about this, his goal is to shoot over 90% this year. So it'll be interesting to see. You say he's a little bit over 88, so he's close there. But, when you get that good, it's hard to move that percentage up. You got to be perfect almost.
He's at 89.9 as of last night, so who knows?
Oh, okay. He's very close then.
All right, so let's hear what you got for the Big 12 there.
Well, the Big 12, even though some early conference surprises kind of, or at least one with Baylor, it's going to go to Kansas, of course. They have a 3-game lead right now. And it's going to come down probably between Baylor and West Virginia for second place. And actually Baylor plays at West Virginia fairly soon, so that'll be a big game. And Iowa State, who kind of didn't get off to quite the start. I think they were a little more highly regarded and had some early losses, but they've kind of turned things around. They had the big upset at Kansas, and they're sitting right there. Actually, they're tied with West Virginia and Baylor right now in the loss column, and they get to play both of them yet. So they control their destiny there. So it's going to be interesting. Player of the year, actually, again, when I did the national, I had this guy ranked second. A lot of people have him ranked first, and that's Frank Mason, their outstanding guard. He's averaging 20 points, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds, and a lot of people just think he is what makes that team so special. Coach of the year, again, had this guy on my national coach of the year list, and that'd be Scott Drew, who Baylor was not quite as highly regarded as they've turned out to be, and they've had some big wins and have competed with the big boys in the Big 12, and some people even think they might be a number 1 seed. That's yet to be determined, but we know they're going to probably be a 1 or a 2. So Scott Drew, of course, of Indiana Valparaiso fame from that great coaching tree of his father, I'd have to give him Coach of the Year. And the hot seat, well, that's kind of difficult in the Big 12 because you look at the bottom 2 teams. That's Texas and Oklahoma. And, of course, Oklahoma has Lon Kruger, and I don't think he's on any hot seat because he's had great teams. I think the talent's just down a little bit there. But Texas, if there is maybe somebody on the hot seat, and I don't think it's right now, but Shaka Smart hasn't made much progress. I think this is maybe his second season there, maybe third, but I think I'm not sure that second or third, but hasn't made much progress. Now, if that storyline continues for another year or two, then there might be a hot seat for Shaka. But otherwise, I don't think there's any real hot seats in the Big 12 right now.
Well, I'd agree with you. Shaka, there was a lot expected out of Texas and Shaka Smart, and they came out strong last night against West Virginia, but couldn't hold on to it. We'll have to see how that goes. He's a sharp coach, and if he can get the program going, he'll be okay. I guess what we should say is in any of these Big 6 conference, every coach is on the hot seat. I mean, these are all programs that count on bringing in a lot of money for what they produce. So anybody at any time, and we'll talk about that when I talk about the ACC here in a little bit. So good stuff there. We'll have to wait and see. Of course, you never know. There's always surprises. Well, let's go on to the ACC, if that's okay, if you got nothing else to add.
No. Go to our best conference in the country, as many consider it.
They are no doubt. And, coming this week, Louisville's got to travel to UNC. That's going to be a big game. And UNC's fresh off a whooping of a fading UVA, which also dropped a game to Miami last night. So who knows where the Cavaliers are going to go. But even a win by the Tar Heels right now, or a game up, won't lock it up because they still have to go to Charlottesville and host Duke. In fact, there's 4 teams within 2 games of each other at the top of the standings: North Carolina, Louisville, Duke, and Notre Dame. And unlike some other tight races, all 4 still have to play each other. North Carolina, like I just said, will host Louisville, and they have to host Duke at the end of the season. Louisville, again, North Carolina, and they host Notre Dame. Duke plays at North Carolina in the season finale, and Notre Dame to Louisville. It's going to be interesting. You know, I said this at the beginning, and I still stick by it. This is going down to the last weekend, and I think the winner of that UNC-Duke game is the one that's going to pull it out. And don't forget, Duke all has to go to Syracuse, who's been hot lately, and you can never count on coming out of there with a Jim Boeheim team. So it'll be interesting to see how this pulls out. But we've been talking about the ACC all weekend. They might send as many as 10 teams to the NCAAs. My player of the year, I think it just comes down to two, Justin Jackson out of North Carolina and Luke Kennard out of Duke. Kennard, who didn't really come out of nowhere because he was highly ranked, but it didn't get the talk of people like Grayson Allen and some of the other Terry Giles that were in there. But he's emerged as a 20-point-per-game guy, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 44% from the three. And he's been a solid presence in a tough year. But I think you've got to take a backseat to Justin Jackson of North Carolina. 18.6 points per game, almost 5 boards, 2.5 assists, 39% from the field. But he's the team leader. And something we don't get from the statistics is that they sort of follow what he does, and that makes it very different overall. So Justin Jackson would be my pick. For Coach of the Year, I think there's 4 candidates. Josh Pastner has come into Georgia Tech and sort of lit them on fire. He's had wins over Duke, Louisville, and UVA. But still, his predecessor, this is Josh's first year. His predecessor went 21-15 last year. Right now, he's only looking at 16-11. So he had the talent there. Mike Bray from Notre Dame, been up and down, 44th in the preseason poll. They still got an outside chance to win the NCAA, and they're going to be probably a top 4 seed in the tournament. You got Leonard Hamilton at Florida State. They fought it out. There's still an outside chance they could win the ACC, but I'm going to go with Coach K. And that may surprise people because they were number 1 in the preseason poll, but the wheels almost fell off. He kept things going through the Grayson Allen controversy, Harry Giles injury, his own back surgery. A month ago, we thought that Duke was going to drop out of the top 25. Now are they not only in position to win the ACC, but they could get a potential number 1 seed. And I direct all of that to the presence of one of the greatest coaches that's ever walked the sideline in Mike Krzyzewski. In the ACC, the hot seat is already burning people's tushies as Mike Godfrey got his started this week. The Wolfpack said goodbye to him, though they're going to let him finish the season, even though they had a big win over Duke when they were down. And he's got 2 Sweet 16 trips. That shows how tough this is. A 500 overall record, though, doesn't cut it with the Wolfpack over the past 2 seasons. I'd say Jim Christian, because any coach in Boston College at the ACC is going to be on the hot seat because, he's only 2-13 and 9-19 overall. Brad Browell is probably out at Clemson. He's had 1 bid in 6 years. They had the run. They looked good earlier this year, but they faded of late. And most people think Mark Fox at Georgia will be out. Only 2 bids in his previous 7 years and only 500 in the ACC, and that doesn't cut it there. So a little more in-depth there for the ACC. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree with you. I was one of those that kind of written Duke off. And, again, we know Coach K is a great coach. He's done a lot of things, of course, won national championships, so there's no disputing that. But he has done a good job because I think there was quite the turmoil there with the Grayson Allen, of course, him having to leave for 3 or 4 weeks because of the back surgery, injuries that plagued them early on. And so, he's righted the ship. And, again, they're sailing like the Duke Blue Devils usually do about this time toward March. So have to agree with you that. And Luke Kennard, he doesn't get all the accolades, but if you can't not watch Duke play and say, maybe he isn't the most athletically gifted, but he makes that team go. He can make shots. He can make plays. He's just a basketball player. So I have to agree with you there. And then the question I asked, and this question was being bannered around up in Milwaukee in pregame talk. Why would you fire your coach before the end of the season but leave him in place? And I could not, nor anyone else could come up with any good reason for that. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I don't like the idea of firing a coach in the middle of the season. It's not that far away from the end of the season, unless it's for an ethics violation or, like you got Larry Eustace, who's in trouble, Colorado State, for abusing his players or what happened earlier this year in Moorhead. In that case, off you go. It's the moral turpitude. It's the whatever clause you want to put in there. But Mike Gottfried is a class act, and I think he deserves better. The nice thing is they are letting him finish the season, and any employer has that opportunity. You've been in education. Your principal could have come to you and said, "Hey, we're not offering you a contract for next year," and let you finish the year. So it's not a crazy thing. The things that I've heard is that Debbie Yao sort of felt that the seat of the pants might turning up on her instead of Mike Gottfried if she didn't do something, that people were kind of talking. So she did what she had probably planned to do at the end of the year. She just did it now, even though a couple of weeks ago she said she wouldn't do anything until the end of the season.
The only rational thing that I came up with or came up in those discussions was maybe you are advertising early before everybody else. Their jobs start to open up, so you're maybe getting some interest from some top assistants around the country that start thinking, hey, maybe I'd want to go there. And maybe an altruistic reason, but I really doubt this has any truth to it, is giving Mark Godfrey a chance to consider his future and maybe start to think about where he may end up, whether that would be in maybe broadcasting analysis or coaching at another school. Only good ideas we could come up with.
Yeah, I can't really buy either of those. I mean, you're going to be in the same position if you wait another week and a half and do it, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's big business now. You just hope that Mike Godfrey did well at Pittsburgh. He's pretty much class act. Again, he's got 2 Sweet 16 trips there in his time, but the last 2 years it's just not enough for a school that's won a couple of NCAA championships. Well, let's turn it around and talk about your favorite conference, the Big East.
The Big East, of course, Nova has a 3-game lead, so they're going to win it. They're going to have the number 1 seed in the Big East tournament, and, of course, are going to be a favorite of some to repeat as national championships, although, as we've talked about recently on our shows, that's a very difficult feat, but I think it's the challenge that they like. Butler and Creighton, of course, are 5 losses down and 3 games behind them in second. And, of course, Xavier now with 3 straight losses has 6 losses in the league, of course, playing pretty much without Trayvon Blue at the last 3 games. And they're going to have to get things turned around so they don't slide even further in the Big East and hopefully not onto the bubble of the NCAA. Don't think that's going to happen, but that remains to be seen. And, of course, Marquette with that big win. And they've had, Marquette's probably on the bubble, but you got to think about it. They beat Villanova. They beat Creighton at Creighton. And they beat Xavier handily the other day. So they got some marquee wins that might get them into the NCAA, especially if they can secure that 5th position in the standings or maybe even challenge Xavier for the 4th position if Xavier continues to fall on hard times. Coach of the year, well, that's a tough one. That would be Jay Wright. And, of course, he will get some consideration, I think, even for National Coach of the Year because of what he has done there, not just this year, last year, but ever since he took over. He's made them a force to be reckoned with on the national level. Player of the Year, again, let's go out on a limb here, and let's say, how about Josh Hart? 18 points a game, 6.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists a game. He's, again, another candidate for National Player of the Year. Probably going to see him for the last time. Actually, he is a senior, so he will be in the NBA or somewhere else next year, and that's good. Coach on the hot seat, you won't have any trouble because I've talked about it pretty much from the beginning of the year. Again, though, he's had a couple big wins lately, so maybe saved his job again in mediocrity, and that would be John Thompson III at Georgetown. Again, I just think for his talent level, I just don't think he's getting the job done. But, again, his name and getting a few big wins here lately may have saved him, but his seat, I think, has to be the hottest. Coach of the year. Oh, I already gave that. You know what? I did say Jay Wright, but here's another. Maybe this is an honorable mention. Would be Chris Holtman at Butler, because remember, Butler coming into the season wasn't picked near the top by most of the people who do that, like you and I, because they had lost Keelan Martin and Jones. I'm trying to think of his first name. Big guy underneath who was a great scorer. So he's done a great job there with Butler. And especially, I don't think, if you look across the board, I don't think Butler has as much natural talent, basketball ability as some of the other teams in the Big East. But Coach Holtman gets the most out of them, and I think he does a great job coaching them.
Yeah, it's not quite the direction I thought you were going to. I thought you might mention Coach McDermott there at Creighton, who lost his big star in the middle of the year and was able to retool the offense and get them back up. But, yeah, they're worthy candidates all. Of course, big week for Villanova. They face both Butler and Creighton before we'll be on the air again next week. Butler tomorrow night and Creighton on Saturday. Both those games are in Philadelphia, so it may not be as harsh, but this would be the chance for somebody to put a dent in Villanova before the tournament. And it's just it'll be an interesting, I think, Big East tournament, because there might be some teams that can play their way in, and I agree with you. Xavier might have to consider what they have to do. We'll talk about more of that on our Trogcast on Thursday when we talk about Xavier basketball. And, of course, we have a special guest on that, Dale Harmon, who was a star in the 70s. And he'll be talking about his time at Xavier and his thoughts on the game as well. Well, that leads us to the final conference we have to talk about today, which would be the Pac-12. And I saved them for last because they've got a really big week, which will probably decide it. I mean, it's not downplay Florida having to play South Carolina and Kentucky. But Zona has a one-game lead in the Pac-12. But Oregon does hold the tiebreaker because they only played once and they played head-to-head. And Arizona has to play USC on Thursday and then number 5 UCLA on Saturday. And that's tough back-to-back. Now, luckily they have them both at home. They went there and played in LA and played them on Thursday, Saturday, and defeated both early in the year. So they've got the heads up against them. But if one of them would happen to beat them, that would drop them into a tie for Oregon with Oregon for the Pac-12 standings, and Oregon would win on the tiebreaker. Of course, UCLA this week avenged their loss to Southern California, and Oregon needs that little help to win the tie. Going with my Player of the Year candidates, there's several in there. A lot of people are going to mention Markelle Fultz from Washington, who quite possibly could be the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. But Washington hasn't gone anywhere, and he hasn't really made those around him better, so I can't put him up for that, even though it's supposed to be an individual, not a team award. I think part of that is how you make the people around you better and raise your team. And a team that's 9-18, I really can't consider having been lifted up. Lauri Markkanen from Arizona has been a very pleasant surprise. Great overseas addition for Zona, big man who can play outside, a great defender. And I think I'd give him more the newcomer of the year than player of the year. Everybody's looking at Lonzo Ball, who makes UCLA tick. He's over 15 points, over 6 boards, 7.5 assists, great playmaker. Had some great late game heroics. But my one knock against Lonzo Ball, and don't give me that, he's going to be a fantastic NBA player. He is going to be a one and done. He could be the number one pick as well in the NBA. Is a little bit of subject defense, which isn't going to hurt him in the NBA. And those late game heroics sometimes wouldn't be necessary if there was a little better overall management earlier in the game and pumping up the defense. So for me, I'm going to go with Dylan Brooks of Oregon. He's averaging 15, 2.8 boards, 2.9. He's shooting 52% from the field, 73 from the line, 43 from three-point. But what people don't forget, may not remember, is he went out with an injury, and that's when Oregon kind of took its slump. I'm having problems talking today. And sort of lost its mojo. So it's sort of as Brooks goes or as Dylan goes, so go the Ducks, and I think that's an important thing. He rises to the occasion, really did in that Zona game a couple weeks ago. So I think he's going to be your player of the year, at least my player of the year in the Pac-12. Coaching candidates, you can't ignore the four that are at the top. I think one of the surprises this year has been Andy Enfield at USC. They, again, got absolutely no attention in the preseason poll, and they're going to go to the NCAA. They only have 6 losses, but 4 of those are to Oregon, UCLA, and Zona, teams above them. All, right now they're ranked 4, 5, and 6 in the country, so nothing wrong with that. You got to give a lot of credit to Dana Altman for his success in Eugene. Sometimes he just doesn't seem to get the credit. It seems like with Bouchard and Brooks and those guys, they've got good players. But they started high in the polls and then faded and then came back. And they had the big win over Zona and then couldn't continue it. They had that bad loss against Colorado. Now they need help. So, a different comeback story than Coach K. I think there's a little more consistency is needed up there. Steve Alford, of course, gets a lot of mention at UCLA. But again, a lot of talent there, and I think looking toward championships, they don't have themselves in the best seat. They're 2 games behind Arizona. And, again, that suspect defense makes me worried. And so I'm going to go with Sean Miller from Arizona. And more for sort of like the same as I said for Coach K, Jim. He lost his many people considered his most talented freshman, Terrence Ferguson, before the season ever started because he decided to go play professionally in Australia for his one-and-done year. Then what they thought was probably would be their starting small forward, Ray Smith, goes down with a ACL injury before the year. He loses Alonzo Trier to a medical suspension and doesn't play 19 games due to that suspension, and somehow keeps these Wildcats going. They're 22-3, and their only losses are to Butler, which is still right there in the top 25, and that was on a neutral court, to number 1 Gonzaga, and then to Oregon, where you had to go to the home of the longest current home winning streak in the NCAA. So I'm going to go with Sean as the big coach of the year there, and I think they are going to pull out this Pac-12 championship. And the coach on the hot seat has to be Lorenzo Ramar. 15 years at Washington. He gets what most people feel was the best player in last year's recruitment in Markelle Fultz, and he's only 2-13 in the league and 9-18 overall. He hasn't gone to the NCAA since 2011, so I'm pretty sure that he's going to be looking for work at the end of the season. What about you?
Well, the only thing I can concur with all your choices there. If you want to give another award, I don't know if you read this or not. For Father of the Year would be Lonzo Ball's father. Did you read the comment? He just come out and said that he thought his son was better than Steph Curry. Why would you say that? That's a comment that's going to be talked about. Maybe he wanted to get didn't think his son was getting enough attention, but I just think it's going to put undue pressure on him, and I don't know. Interesting guy, and I thought about it that, was it his brother scored 93 points in a high school game a couple weeks ago, and I remember you even said, what was that coach thinking? Well, do you know the coach is their father, so that's what that coach was thinking. So just a little off comment there about that. But, I agree. The Pac-12's done well. Steve Alford, I think he's a great coach. People tend to disagree, but I still say one day we might see him coaching back in Bloomington, Indiana. Yeah, UCLA's a great job. I guess LA's the glitzy. I think for a boy who was born in Newcastle, Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana might be the pinnacle of his ambitions. But I may be wrong. So
you're right. You heard it first. Pick up the phone. Jim Reaker's called it. Jimmy the Greek is predicting. It's not the first time he has said that. I agree with you about Mr. Ball. He's one of the coaches on that team. But you also have to remember there was a fellow named Richard Williams who said, I got one daughter who's going to be very good in tennis, and her little sister is going to be even better. And he did that when his children, Venus and Serena, were 11 and 10 years old. So who knows? Maybe, and I believe the only thing he tempered his comments later by saying he thought Lorenzo was better than Steph Curry was at this point in his career. But he did say in the discussion that he thought he was going to be better than Steph overall. So we'll have to see how that goes. But lots of fun things going on in the NCAA. The season will end for most conferences next weekend, then they'll go right into their conference tournaments. Some of the lesser ones will end this week and then have their conference tournaments while the big things are handling and hoping they're putting themselves in the position for the NCAA. We'll be back with you next Tuesday with some more of that news and see how things are going. And also we'll be with you on Thursday for our Razorcast. Like I said, we have a special guest on that, Dale Harmon, who played with the Muskies and was their leading scorer on the 77 team. Got a lot of neat things to add and talk about the state of basketball and the Muskies. But, of course, we won't go without our trivia and tidbits because I'm sure Jim has dug deep into the archives of some musty library to find something that he wants to stump me with here at the end of our broadcast.
Okay, just real quick, throw in the Mastodon minute. The Mastodon's 1-1 for the week. Beat North Dakota State, but lost to South Dakota State, sitting at 18-10 overall, 7-7 in the Summit League, and tied for fourth. No, I'm going to stick with them. They're going to make some noise in March. They've hit a little bit of a lull here, but they're going to come around. All right, trivia. Well, we were talking about players of the year, coach of the year, so on and so on. And again, I had geared my study and review more of the National Player of the Year, which I'm sure we'll talk about later this year. But so the question kind of comes from that. And looking at it in 1943, of course, if you look at it, it's kind of interesting. There's really about 5 or 6 different national awards for Player of the Year. And through the years, sometimes it is the same player that gets them all. But in some years, and I think this year will be one of those years, they kind of get split up where maybe there's 2, 3 different players that win the different awards just because of kind of the parity I think we have in players and teams this year. But anyway, the Sporting News was one of the first National Player of the Year awards to be created. That was in 1943. So your question today, Jeff, is who was the first player to win the Sporting News National Player of the Year for more than 1 year? And actually, he won it for 3 years straight. First player to ever do that.
Oh, I thought you were going to go send me all the way back to 1943. I mean, some of these questions.
No.
That's a great question. And my first response would be Bill Russell.
And that is not right.
That's not.
I'll give you another guess.
I'm just thinking, he was there with
I'll give you a year and you'll nail this. 1957-58 was his first season, and he won it the 2 years after that season.
Well, then it's got to be Wilt.
Mr. Bearcat fan, you're missing it.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, I was going to say, it can't be Wilt because he didn't play 3 years. Oscar Robertson then, yeah. Well, there you go. I was off.
Ding. There you go. Yeah, and in fact, and here's what's another interesting. I almost was going to give you this question. Then he won it 3 years in a row, and then it was followed after his last year of winning it. Jerry Lucas from Ohio State won it 2 years in a row. So for those 5 years, the Player of the Year, the Sporting News, again, which was probably the most prestigious at that time, we had 5 in a row coming from the state of Ohio. So, and again, I don't think it's going to be. It's almost impossible for a player to win it even 2 years in a row anymore, because for the most part, I think if you're National Player of the Year, you're not playing next year in the NCAA. You're probably playing in the NBA.
Yeah, those late 50s, early 60s were a great time to be around Ohio in basketball. Ohio State went to several Final Fours and won a championship. Of course, Oscar didn't get to win one, but the Bearcats, after he left, won 2 in a row and then lost a great overtime game where they would have been the first team to win 3 in a row. So lots of great stuff. Okay, well, again, we'll be back next Tuesday to have even more about this and lots of things NCAA basketball as we go at the end of a fantastic Bronco-busting year. A couple things to remember as we go out. On this date, 1885, the Washington Monument was dedicated in Washington, D.C., a big icon at the end of the mall. For my buddy Jim there, this is 1948. NASCAR was founded on this date. So all those guys down there hot rodding on the beaches of Daytona got started with that race, which I believe is that this weekend. I think they.
That is this Sunday, which actually I was kind of looking is going to keep me busy because the Xavier Musketeers play, I think, at 2:30 or 3 on Sunday. So might not see that all in its entirety. Although you know anything about NASCAR racing, you don't have to watch the whole thing. Just watch the last 5 laps.
Kind of like an NBA game. Yeah, and this will take some people. It was 50 years ago today, or 49 years, 1968. Major League Baseball generously announced that they were going to raise the minimum salary of players to $10,000 a year. Of course, the minimum today is $500,000, and there's $200 million contracts. But back then, they were making big money. So thanks for listening, basketball fans. We'll be back with you next Tuesday with going to be a big weekend in most of the conferences, and we'll start setting you up for the conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament. So thanks for listening, and again, come and listen to our Razorcast on Thursdays. We're going a little earlier this day to suit Dale's schedule, but we'll probably still post on Thursday.
All right, Jeff. We'll see you.